The silence before the stormed room was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes with peace, but the kind that feels heavy. Like the air knows something's wrong. Sandra sat on the edge of the old leather chair, her hands folded in her lap. Fingers trembling just slightly, her lips parted once, then closed again. The words wouldn't come. Outside the window, the world went on. Taxis honked, people laughed, birds chirped, and traffic lights blinked in rhythm. But inside this one room, time had frozen. Keanu stood across from her, one hand still on the door. He had just entered, not expecting to find her like this. Usually, she was full of energy, always speaking with fire and kindness. But today, she looked like a shadow of herself. Her eyes, usually warm and steady, were glassy. Her voice, the one the world knew so well, was missing. "Sandra," he asked gently, barely above a whisper. She blinked. Her throat moved, but nothing came out. Keanu didn't move. He didn't speak again. Instead, he stepped inside, slowly. Letting the door close behind him, he didn't sit down, didn't pace. He just waited. The silence stretched on. This wasn't the Sandra Bullock he knew. She had always been strong, graceful, always the one who held others together when things fell apart. She was the one who cracked jokes when tension filled the set, the one who sent quiet texts to cast and crew late at night, thanking them for their work. The one who never forgot a birthday or a moment someone needed a friend. But today, something was different. She was holding something back, and it was too heavy for her shoulders. Keanu saw it in the way her hands clenched the fabric of her pants, in the way her eyes darted toward the floor every time he looked at her. She was scared, not of him, not of being judged, but of breaking, and he wouldn't let that happen. Not on his watch. He walked to the small side table, picked up a mug, and filled it with warm water from the carafe. No tea, no lemon, just warmth. He brought it to her slowly, like offering a fragile bird a crumb of bread. "Here," he said softly. She looked at it for a long moment. Then, with shaking hands, she took it. The mug wobbled just slightly in her grip, but she didn't spill. Still, she said nothing. Keanu sat across from her. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. He just sat there, sipping from his own glass, as if silence was the most natural language in the world. The room stayed quiet for nearly 15 minutes, but it wasn't awkward. It was something deeper, sacred, almost. Two people sharing a moment that didn't need words to mean something. And then she tried. Her lips moved just a little. He looked up, eyes kind, patient. "You don't have to," he said quickly. "Not until you're ready." She nodded, not because she didn't want to speak, but because she was grateful someone understood that silence could be healing too. And that's when a tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away fast, hoping he didn't notice. But of course he did. Still, he didn't say a word about it. He didn't rush to comfort her. He didn't make it about him. He just stayed right where he was. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside. It's about last week," she finally whispered. He leaned in slightly, listening. I found out something," she continued, voice low, and trembling, "about someone close. Someone I thought I could trust." Keanu didn't interrupt. "They weren't who I thought they were," she said, her voice growing a bit steadier with each word. "And now everything feels off. Like, I don't know who I am anymore. Like, maybe I don't even belong here." He blinked slowly, letting the weight of her words settle between them. "You do?" said simply. Just 2 words, but they landed like a lighthouse in a storm. Sandra looked up, eyes searching his. "How do you know?" He smiled gently. "Because even in silence, you shine." That was the moment the dam inside her cracked. She let out a soft sob, one hand coming up to cover her mouth. She didn't want to fall apart in front of him, but something about his presence made it okay, made her feel like falling apart wasn't weakness. It was just being human, and he stayed. He stayed for every tear, every shaky breath, every long pause. He didn't look at his phone, didn't shift uncomfortably, didn't try to fix it. He just let her feel as the light outside began to change and the shadows grew longer. Sandra finally spoke again, more clearly this time. I was afraid no one would understand. Keanu nodded. Sometimes the best understanding doesn't come with answers, just presence. Nodded slowly, her voice small but steady. Thank you for staying. He leaned back in his chair, a soft smile on his face. I wasn't going anywhere. And in that quiet space, something changed. It wasn't dramatic. No music swelled, no tears turned to laughter. But something inside her softened, something inside him settled. They didn't need to fix each other. They just needed to stay taut together, and they did. The weight of what she never said next morning, the sun rose early, spilling light through the tall windows of Sandra's home. But the warmth outside didn't match the cold stillness inside. Sandra hadn't slept, not really. She had sat curled on the same couch all night, wrapped in a thin blanket, staring out at the sky as it slowly turned from black to blue. Keanu had left only when she insisted, but not before checking 3 times if she was sure she'd be all right. He didn't hover, didn't pressure, but when he walked away, she noticed something she hadn't in a long time. She didn't feel alone. Not in the way that made your chest feel hollow, not in the way that hurt. His presence had lingered, quiet and strong, even after he was gone. But now, the silence was back, and the weight she carried felt heavier than ever. In the kitchen, she made coffee she wouldn't drink. She set the mug on the table and stared at it. What she had told Keanu the night before was only a piece of the truth. The part that was easy to say. The part that didn't risk destroying her entire world. She had discovered a betrayal. Someone she trusted with her heart had lied, for years, about something big, something personal. And that wasn't all. The truth had threatened more than just her emotions. It threatened her sense of identity, brought up memories she had buried so deep. She hoped they'd never resurface, but they had. And now, every mirror felt like a stranger, every photo, a lie, every kind word from the past, a wound. She picked up her phone. She stared at the screen. Keanu had sent a simple message just an hour ago, just checking in. No need to reply. I'm here. She smiled weakly. How did he always know the right thing to say by saying so little? Later that afternoon, she walked to the park near her home. It's no makeup, no sunglasses, just herself. No one recognized her. Maybe they did and didn't say anything. Maybe they didn't care. Either way, it felt like a relief. She sat on a quiet bench under a tree and watched a small group of children play soccer. Their laughter drifted through the air like music. One girl tripped and scraped her knee, and another kid rushed to help her up. No teasing, no mocking, just kindness. And for a moment, Sandra felt tears rise again. Not because she was sad, but because she missed that version of the world. The one where kindness was simple, where love didn't come with conditions. She didn't notice someone sit beside her until she heard his voice. Mind if I join? It was Keanu. She turned to him slowly, surprised but not shocked. How did you know I'd be here? He smiled. I didn't. I just felt like walking. The universe brought me here. She laughed quietly. You and your universe. It works, he said with a shrug. They sat in silence again. This time it wasn't heavy. It was soft. After a while, she finally spoke. It's not just about betrayal, she said, her voice distant. It's about shame. He looked at her, patient. When you trust someone, she continued, and they lie to you, yes, it makes you question your judgment. And when you've been in the public eye for so long, there's this pressure to always look like you have it together, like you're strong, but I'm tired of pretending. He nodded slowly. Pretending is exhausting. And lonely, she added. Keanu picked up a leaf from the ground, twirled it between his fingers, then let it go. Can I tell you something? He asked. She looked at him. Always. You don't know the world's strength. Not all the time. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is fall apart. Not everyone earns the right to see that side of you. But I'm honored that you let me. Her throat tightened. No one had said it like that before. People always wanted her to bounce back. to be the symbol of power, grace, charm. But Keanu didn't want a symbol. He wanted the real her, the one who could cry, the one who didn't have answers, the one who sat in silence and just needed someone beside her. She looked away. Tears falling again? I'm scared, she admitted. Me too, they whispered. They both stared ahead at the kids, who had now finished their game and were lying in the grass, laughing, arguing about who won. Sandra closed her eyes. I don't know how to fix this, she said. Keanu didn't rush to solve anything. Instead, he said, then don't. Not today. Just feel it. We'll figure it out later. She leaned her head back against the bench and exhaled deeply. Thank you for not pushing me to be okay. He smiled softly. I've learned that real friends don't ask you to be okay. They sit with you until you are. For the first time in days, she felt like maybe she could sleep that night. Maybe she didn't have to hold everything together by herself. Maybe healing didn't have to look like perfection. Maybe it could just look like two people on a bench saying very little, but meaning everything. Back at her home that evening, Sandra stood in front of her bedroom mirror. She looked tired, eyes still swollen, face bare. But for the first time, she didn't look away. She didn't try to hide her reflection. She just stared and let herself be. She heard a soft chime on her phone. New message from Keanu. You're stronger than you think, but you don't have to. Be tonight. She pressed her hand to her heart. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like a cage. It felt like peace. What the past tried to hid, Ethy morning light poured through the windows in long, soft lines, wrapping the room in warmth. But inside Sandra's chest, the cold hadn't fully lifted. It had eased, yes, but a strange numbness remained. She stood in her kitchen, barefoot, staring at a half-toasted piece of bread in the toaster. She hadn't even pressed the lever. Her fingers hovered above it. But her mind was somewhere else. Last night had been the first time in weeks that she had fallen asleep without exhaustion forcing her into it. Instead, she had rested. Not peacefully, but gently. Like her body had finally loosened its grip, just a little. Like her heart had stopped bracing itself. She hadn't had a dream. And maybe that was the dream in itself, just not having to relive it again. The knock came around 10 a.m. gentle, 3 times. Before opening the door, who it would be. Keanu stood there with 2 paper cups in one hand and a small brown bag in the other. He gave her a soft smile. I brought breakfast. I didn't make it. I know better than that. She stepped aside, without a word, letting him in. Them was no longer tense. It had become familiar. Like breathing. Like a language that didn't need translating. He placed the bag on the table and opened it slowly. 2 almond croissants. You remembered, she said softly. Of course, he replied. They sat. They ate in silence. But this time it wasn't. Because there was too much pain. It was because there was finally space to breathe. After a while, she asked, do you ever think about the past? Not the good parts. The parts you never talk about. He wiped his hands with a napkin and thought for a moment. Sometimes, he said, but not because I want to. It just shows up, uninvited. Mine showed up last week, she said, and it came with receipts. Keanu tilted his head. You want to talk about it? She hesitated and nodded. I got a letter, she began. Not an email, not a call, an actual letter. From someone I hadn't heard from in years. Keanu waited. It was from my mother's old friend. Someone who was there when I was a kid. Someone who knew things I had tried to forget. Her voice wavered. She told me stories, she said. Stories about what happened back then, about things that were kept from me, about my father, about why he left, about how much pain my mother was in. Things she never told me. Keanu stayed still, no judgment, just presence. And suddenly, Sandra continued, everything I thought I knew about my childhood started to crumble. The memories I trusted, they weren't the whole story. And I started questioning, what else have I not seen clearly? What else have I convinced myself was fine when it wasn't? Keanu nodded, slow and steady. Sometimes we protect ourselves by rewriting the past. It's how we survive. But what if the truth ruins the person you thought you were? He looked at her gently. Then maybe it's not ruin, maybe it's rebirth. She sat with that for a long moment. I was always the strong one, she whispered. The fixer. The one people leaned on. But I feel like a puzzle someone dropped, and now I don't even know which pieces belong. He leaned forward. You're allowed to be the one who leans. Even if just for a while. Tears welled in her eyes again. But this time, she didn't fight them. She'd let them come, soft and quiet. They fell onto her hands, onto the table. She didn't wipe them away. Keanu reached across and placed his hand over hers. He didn't squeeze, didn't grip. Just rested it there like an anchor in water. I used to think silence meant strength, she said. And now, I think it's where fear hides. Or healing, he offered. Depending on what you do with it, they sat in the quiet that followed. And this time, it felt different. It wasn't the silence of sorrow. It was the silence of truth. Later that day, Sandra pulled out an old photo box from her closet. It was dusty, untouched for years. She brought it to the living room, placed it on the floor, and opened it. Keanu sat beside her. They went through picture after picture, young Sandra, with crooked pigtails. Her mother smiling in a way that looked almost forced. Cards from birthdays long forgotten, newspaper clippings, old scripts, ticket stubs. Then she found a letter. It wasn't the one she had received last week. This one was old, folded so many times the edges had worn thin. She opened it carefully, her mother's handwriting. My sweet Sandra, it began. Her breath caught Keanu. Watched her face closely. I never knew how to tell you the truth, the letter read. I was afraid it would hurt you. But not telling you, maybe that hurt you more. I hope one day you'll find this and know that I was just a woman trying to protect her daughter and failing sometimes. But never, ever stopping loving you. Sandra couldn't finish the letter. She handed it to Keanu and covered her mouth. With both hands, shaking, Keanu read the rest quietly when he was done. He folded it gently, placed it back in her lap, and whispered, she loved you, in the way she knew how. Sandra nodded slowly, tears falling freely now, and for the first time, she didn't feel shame for crying. She felt human, and she wasn't alone, as the sun began to dip below the trees. Casting long shadows on the floor, Sandra turned to Keanu. You never asked why I pushed everyone away. You didn't need to explain, he said. But I want to, she replied. And she did. She talked, and he stayed again. Always. The room she never entereth. Next day, Sandra woke with a tightness in her chest. Not pain, something heavier. Her heart knew today would not be easy. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, hands in her lap, staring at the floor. Outside, the day had begun. Cars moved, birds sang, leaves danced in the wind, but inside her home, time waited for her. There was one room in the house she hadn't opened in years, a room she had kept locked, both literally and emotionally. It was her mother's. After her passing, Sandra had shut the door and promised herself she'd deal with it later. That word had followed her for years later. Later, when she felt stronger. Later, when she had more time. Later, when the memories didn't hurt so much. But later had finally arrived. She had told Keanu about the letter, about the truth she had found, and he had stayed. He hadn't judged. He hadn't tried to solve her. He had simply sat with her, and now, because of that, she felt ready. Or close enough. Keanu came over just before noon. He didn't ask questions. When she met him at the door and quietly said, I want to open it today, he just nodded together. They walked down the hallway. It was quiet, each step echoing slightly. The key sat in her palm, cold and sharp. She paused outside the door, hand trembling just slightly. You don't have to, Keanu said gently. I do, she whispered. Not for her, not even for the truth, but for me. She slid the key into the lock. It clicked. The door creaked. Open dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts. The smell hit her first told paper. soft perfume, and something faintly sweet. The room was untouched. Her mother's favorite chair still faced the window. A small bookshelf stood to the side, a table with an old lamp, and on the far end a wardrobe, closed. Heavy Sandra stepped inside. She didn't cry, not yet. She just looked. Everything was still the same, the way her mother had left it.
Out.
The cardigan draped over the armrest, a half-read book with a bookmark. Still inside, small dish with faded pearls. Keanu stayed near the doorway, letting her lead. She walked slowly, touching items with care. Her fingers ran over the book spines. She picked up the pearls and held them for a moment before setting, then back down. Then she walked to the wardrobe. It was the only part of the room she had never opened. Even before her mother passed, she had been told gently but firmly to stay out of it. "There's nothing in there for you," her mother used to say. But now Sandra knew that wasn't true. She placed her hand on the handle, paused, and pulled inside. Were boxes carefully stacked, labeled in her mother's handwriting. Sandra years. Letters never sent, truths I couldn't say. Her breath caught. "Keanu?" she whispered. "I think I found it." He walked to her side, his face calm, open, together. They pulled the first box down. Inside were baby photos, hospital bracelets, drawings, notes her mother had written in journals. So many moments frozen in time. Sandra turned the pages, her heart swelling and breaking with each one. "She was watching me," Sandra said softly, even when she didn't show it. She saved everything. They opened the second box. Letters dated over decades, addressed to Sandra, but never sent. She picked one at random and read aloud. "My Sandra, you smiled today after falling off your bike. You got back up and said, 'That didn't hurt?' But I saw the scrape on your knee, saw the tears you didn't let fall. You're so strong." Sandra's voice cracked. "I wish I had. Told you that it's okay to fall, that it's okay to cry, that you didn't have to be perfect. But I didn't know how to say it. And now I'm scared it's too late." She stopped reading. Keanu gently took the letter from her and folded it. "It's not too late," he said. The third box, she opened it. Slowly inside were audio tapes, cassette. Tapes. Handwritten labels. "The truth about your father, the night I almost left, why I stayed." Sandra stared at them. Breath shallow. "I don't have a cassette player," she whispered. "I do," Keanu said. "At my place." She looked at him. "Really?" He nodded. "I keep one for old voice journals. I never throw away things that hold memories." They packed the tapes in a small bag. That evening, they sat in Keanu's quiet living room. The player rested on the table between them. Sandra pressed play. Her mother's voice filled the room. "If you're hearing this, it means you opened the door." Sandra clutched her knees to her chest. "I didn't tell you everything," her mother continued. "Not because I didn't love you, but because I loved you too much. Your father was a complicated man, charming, strong, but he had shadows, deep ones." The tape crackled. "He left not because of you, not even because of me. He left because he was running from himself. And I didn't want you to grow up thinking it was your fault." Sandra closed her eyes. "You were always the light in my life," the voice said, "and I knew. One day you'd need to know. So here it is." The tape ended. Silence, a heavy, knowing silence. Sandra sat frozen for a moment. Then her shoulders shook. Keanu moved closer, gently placing a hand on her back, and for the first time, she sobbed. Not from confusion, not from fear, but from release. The kind of cry that cleans the wounds. The kind that comes only when someone is finally ready to heal. And Keanu stayed, not speaking, not moving, just staying, just like always. The moment the light returned at the next morning came slowly, as if even time had decided to move more gently for Sandra. Soft light slid through the sheer curtains, touching everything with a golden kindness. For the first time in weeks, Sandra's body didn't feel like it was holding back a storm. She sat up in bed and listened, not to the world outside, but to herself, and for the first time. The silence inside didn't scare her. There was still pain, yes. There were still questions. There was still a hole where years of misunderstanding had lived, but something had shifted. Anger was softer now. The confusion no longer screamed. Somewhere deep within, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. She stood, bare feet touching the cool floor, and walked toward the hallway. She stopped by the room she had unlocked with Keanu. She pushed the door open. The smell was still there, the quiet scent of old perfume and dust, but it no longer hurt. Now, it reminded her of truth, of love she hadn't understood before. She stepped inside, walked to the wardrobe, and opened the last of the envelopes inside the box labeled Truths I Couldn't Say. Inside was a photo Sandra as a little girl, maybe 6, sitting on her mother's lap, holding a paintbrush. Both were covered in bright colors, pink, yellow, blue, and they were laughing. Truly laughing. Mother had written something on the back in faded ink. This was the last day I ever let go completely. I hope one day you'll teach me how to do it again. Sandra held the photo to her heart. She whispered, I wish I could have helped you the way you helped me. But she knew. Somehow her mother had heard her. By noon, she stood in front of Keanu's door. She didn't text. She didn't call. She just knocked. He opened it with the same calm smile. It's the one he wore like armor made of kindness. He said. She stepped inside. I need your help, she said, voice steady. I want to go back. He blinked. Back. To the studio, the one we worked at last year. The last set where everything started to fall apart for me. He nodded, understanding. You're sure? She smiled just a little. No, but I'm ready to try. They arrived late afternoon. The lot was mostly empty. The crew had wrapped on a new film the day before, so Sandra knew the space would be quiet. But the halls, the rooms, the echoes, they still held memories. Not all of them were good. She stepped into the dressing room where she had last broken down. It was there, under that same mirror, that she had first realized she couldn't keep. Pretending, she remembered the weight in her chest. The fear of being seen as weak. The panic of the past she hadn't faced. Keanu stood behind her, watching in silence. I used to stare into this mirror and lie to myself, she said. Smile. Act like everything was fine. But I hated her, the woman in the reflection. She turned around slowly, eyes meeting his. But now I want to make peace with her. He stepped forward. Then let's start here. Together they sat. Sandra pulled out the small notebook she had carried in her bag, the one her mother had written in, the one she had filled with her own letters too. I wrote something, she said. Not a script, not a statement, just truth. He nodded. She opened the notebook and began to read. Her voice was clear, not loud, not dramatic, just honest. I've been afraid of silence all my life. I thought silence meant emptiness. But now I know it means space. It means room for healing. I spent years building walls to keep people from seeing the broken parts of me, but those walls kept out the light too. Now I want light. Keanu listened, eyes soft, steady. I'm still afraid, she continued. But I'm learning to walk with that fear, not around it, not against it, with it. She closed the notebook and looked up. You were right, she said. Staying doesn't always mean speaking. Sometimes it means not leaving when someone can't find the words. You taught me that, she added. Keanu said nothing. He just took her hand, and in that room filled with old shadows, a new kind of silence bloomed, one made of trust. Later they walked outside together. The sky had turned orange, kind of color that only appears when the day knows it's giving you something special. Sandra looked up at it and whispered, I used to believe healing meant forgetting. I know it means remembering, but without hurting. Keanu smiled. You're not the same woman who sat in silence that first night. I'm still quiet, she said. But now your quiet is strong, he replied. She chuckled softly. Maybe next time I'll be the one who stays, when someone else can't speak. He nodded. That's how it works. We pass it on. Stood in the golden light, saying nothing else. They didn't need to, because healing like kindness, often speaks loudest in silence. When silence turns into strength, sky outside had turned deep blue. Stars blinked faintly above Los Angeles, hiding behind thin clouds that moved slowly like thoughts still unspoken. Inside Keanu's quiet home, Sandra sat on the balcony wrapped in a soft gray blanket, her bare feet curled beneath her. Beside her, Keanu poured 2 cups of tea, no sugar, no milk. Just warmth. Neither of them had said much in the last hour, but there was no need. Sandra looked up at the stars and smiled gently. "It's strange," she whispered, "how something so far away can make you feel like you're not alone." Keanu nodded. "Sometimes distance gives you perspective." She sipped her tea, for the first time in what felt like years. Her heart didn't feel like it was hiding behind locked doors. She had cried. She had opened rooms both in her house and in her heart that she never thought she could face again. She had read her mother's voice. She had learned the truth. Now, the silence she once feared had become her friend. And maybe most surprising of all, she wasn't afraid to sit with it. The next day, Sandra met with her agent. She hadn't planned on working so soon. She wasn't even sure if she was ready. But this meeting wasn't about a role. It was about something else. Her agent, Linda, greeted her with surprise and concern. "Are you okay?" she asked. Sandra smiled softly. "Not completely, but I'm closer than I've been in a long time." Linda nodded slowly. "What can I do?" Sandra took a deep breath. "I want to start a foundation," she said. "For artists who feel like they can't speak, who carry pain quietly. For those dealing with grief, silence, shame, and for those who need someone to stay with them when they can't find the words." Linda leaned forward. "You're serious?" "It's more than I've ever been about anything." Linda smiled. "I'll help. Whatever you need." Walked out of that meeting feeling lighter. Her hands still trembled slightly, but her steps were steady. For the first time, her pain had a purpose. Her silence had shape. It wasn't about being perfect anymore. It was about being present for herself and for others. A few weeks later, she and Keanu stood at a small launch event. Nothing big, no press, just friends, close supporters, and a quiet banner behind them that read, "Stillness speaks a place." For those who can't yet speak for themselves, Sandra stepped up to the small stage, microphone in hand. She looked out at the faces, then at Keanu, who stood at the edge, watching with the same quiet strength he had offered her every step of the way. She took a breath, then another, and she spoke. "Not long ago, I forgot how to speak. Not because I didn't know how, but because the pain had wrapped itself around my voice. I was afraid of judgment, of looking weak, of being misunderstood." She paused, and then someone stayed. She looked at Keanu, and her eyes softened. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't fill the silence. He just stayed. And that gave me the space to find my voice again. She turned back to the crowd. "This foundation is for anyone who's ever felt that silence, who's ever sat in the dark, hoping someone would knock on the door. This is for you. And this is for them. We see you." As she stepped down, the room stayed quiet. Not because no one cared, but because the silence said everything later as people left in small groups. Sandra and Keanu remained by the doorway. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she replied. They walked outside together, the sky stretching wide above them. The air was cool, the breeze gentle. Sandra turned to him. She said, "I think sometimes kindness is just staying with someone long enough for them to become who they were always meant to be." Keanu nodded. "And sometimes healing begins when someone doesn't. Walk away." They walked in silence for a while. Then she asked, "Do you ever regret the times you stayed for someone?" He shook his head. "Never. Because each time, something beautiful came from it, even if it took years." Sandra smiled. "Thank you for staying for me. Always." He said, and he meant it. A few months passed. Sandra had returned to work slowly, mindfully, but with new boundaries. She no longer felt the need to perform strength. Now she simply lived it. Her foundation had grown. She had written a book, not a memoir, but a letter, a long, honest letter to anyone out there who sat in silence. And the most beautiful part? They wrote back. Letters began pouring in. Emails, drawings, poems, people who had never spoken up before now had a place to be heard. And every so often, late at night, she and Keanu would sit on her balcony, reading some of those messages together. Sometimes they laughed, sometimes they cried, but always they stayed. One night, after reading a letter from a young girl who had said, "I thought I was broken until I heard your voice," Sandra turned to Keanu. "You know what I realized?" she asked. "What?" "I was never really broken. I was just carrying too much alone." Keanu nodded. "And now?" She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Now I know better." The stars above them blinked again, quiet and endless. And for once, silence wasn't hiding pain. It was holding peace.